Saxon Algebra 1, half lesson 55. Students, we've come to an exciting place in our studies. This is a really good lesson. And this is the kind of problem that is going to reassure to me that you are ready to head into Algebra 1. So it's a cool place that we're coming to. This is kind of the culmination of your middle school math. And I'm excited about that. Before I dig in any further, let me remind you that our video check-in this week is the usual. So whatever you were doing before Christmas, whatever routine we were in, do that on Thursday or Friday, and we'll be back in the groove. Okay, with our lesson, what we're going to remember is that fractions, decimals, and percents are three languages that relate very well to each other. If you understand fractions, you do understand decimals and percents, and vice versa. They're three ways of saying the same thing. John has illustrated in the book a very nice example of this. So let me just show you. In these three pictures, if you squint a little bit and look at them without focusing on the details, you'll see that this gray bar is exactly the same size in each of the three squares. It's supposed to be. What we're looking at is the number of the value that's represented there. And it's the same in all three. The first one is the fraction box. And what we've done is divided the big box into sections based on the size of this first section, and we see that the box fits 5 of these long skinny rectangles, and so our gray shaded area represents 1/5. That's this value expressed as a fraction. Now with decimals are like fractions except their denominators have to be 1 with a 0 after it, right? So 1/10, 1/100th, 1,000th. We have to have the denominators of 1 with a 0. So what we did was we just took these 5 boxes and we chopped them in half. So now we have 10, right? So now we can see that when we break this down into 10 boxes, our gray area covers 2. So we express this as 0.2 or 2/10, and that is the decimal expression of that same value. Now, if we want to go to percents, what we have to do is divide it into 100 because we just talked about that, right? Percent means by 100. So we have to take the whole big box and divide it up into hundreds, and we see that we get 20 boxes in that gray area. So this same number can be expressed as 20%. So 1/5 equals 2/10 equals 20%. We're going to practice doing this with lots of different numbers. And by doing this, you are proving to yourself and the world that you completely understand how to go back and forth between fractions, decimals, and percents. And therefore, you are 100% ready for full-blown algebra. All right, the way that we're going to do that is not to draw tedious little boxes like John did. We're going to use a table. And that's why I called this lesson a reference table. I'm drawing mine really big. In your homework, you won't have to draw it quite so big. And I'm making room. We have 3 different problems, and we're going to put them all into the same table. When you draw the table, what you do is you make it nice and big, and then you divide it into 3 columns. Fractions, decimals, and percents. I'm going to write them out this time because it's new, but in the future I'll just put F, D, and P into these columns, and you can do that too. We don't have to kill ourselves writing that out every time. Okay? Always in this order. This order, if we look at the numbers in this order, it helps us with the calculations. So, fractions, decimals, percents. Now, when we start filling in a table like this, we want to get our head in the game, right? We want to make this as easy as possible. So what we're going to do is memorize one set of numbers to go across, and that will remind us of how the patterns work. The number is going to be 51 over 100. Okay, I drew mine a little bit short, so I'm not going to try and write that as I put the slanty fraction line. You don't have to do it that way. You can write it more like this. I just didn't want to crowd it so you could see it. All right? 51/100ths expressed as a decimal is 0.51. If you'd like to put a 0 here in front of the decimal, you can. You don't have to. That number can also be reflected as 51%. We call this row the reference numbers. I'm going to write that down, because John's going to tell you to draw the table and insert the reference numbers. This is what he means. He means 51/100, 0.51, and 51%. You don't have to write this. I just added that to the table so that you would know what he means. When he says insert the reference numbers, this is what he means. Memorize those exact numbers. Then what John will do next is he will give us one of the numbers. Okay, so this was example 55.1 was putting in this row. So we already did that. We're not really doing it as a number. Let's do example 55.2 in this row. And John is going to tell us to complete the table, begin by inserting the reference numbers. Okay, we already have ours. And then he gives us 25%. So what we have to do is we have to start with this and then figure out what is the equivalent decimal and what is the equivalent fraction, okay? And we reduce it where we can, the fraction. All right, so that's where these reference numbers helps. They remind us, oh, if we have a 2-digit percentage, we can just write that as 0 point blankety blank, right? So the reference numbers help us remember how this works. And then we go, oh, okay, then we just write 25/100, right? Easy. We just have to remember, oh, that's reducible, so we can go down to 1/4. And you can show your work in the box like that. You don't have to like erase that or anything like that. Just show your work in the box. All right, so this is the second example, and it shows us how we started with one of them, and then we filled in the other two. And our last example for this lesson, 55.3, I'll put in this row, and that will be the end of our chart for this lesson. Complete the table. Begin by inserting the reference numbers. Again, that means the 51. 51/100ths, 0.51, 51%. Always start with that because that will give you great hints as to what to do with your numbers. Okay, the number that we're getting here is 1/16 in the fraction column. All right. That's a hard one because it doesn't have 100 on the bottom, nor does it have a denominator that easily fits into 100, right? Like if this was over 20, we could just multiply it by 5. Or if this was over 5, we could multiply it by 20. You know what I'm saying? If you can easily multiply up from the existing denominator, then it's not so bad. But this is a freaky one. So our only choice is to remember that this says divided by. All right? And we have to do some long division. 1 divided by 16. Oh, it's so sad, isn't it? There's no decimal here, but there's a decimal there, so we'll put it in. 16 does not go into 1. 16 does not go into 10. Put some zeros up here. 16 into 100. Okay, we can make that work. And I'll just cut through the chase, spoilers, and tell you it goes 6 times. So we're just doing long division here. I subtract and bring down another 0. 16 goes into 40 twice, and that's 32, right? We subtract and we bring down. And finally, we have something that 16 goes into perfectly. It's 5. Okay, so this is a worst case scenario. This is an example of a number in the fraction column that we cannot do in our heads. We have to actually calculate it. But we figured out that it comes out to 0.0625. That's the decimal number. So we got that one. Beautiful. Whew, it was kind of a workout, wasn't it? Now we have to take this and convert it into a percent. And that's a little tricky too. So let's look at the pattern. What were we doing here? We took the decimal and we moved it 2 jumps, didn't we? To change it from a decimal to the number of the percent. We did the same thing here. 1, 2, 25%. So let's do that. 1, 2. That gives us 6.25%. And that's the right answer. Okay? So these are the ones we figured out. Okay? So we started with this number, we filled in that row. We started with this number, we filled in this row. We had to use different tips and strategies to get to where we needed to go. This row helps us, although sometimes this fraction is just easier, right, than what we're dealing with in our real world. But you can see that filling in these tables, this reference table, as we're calling it, it gives you all kinds of different practice in fractions, decimals, and percents. And that's why I get so excited when we learn this, is because I know that this is your chance to really master once and for all how these suckers work. Because once we move completely into algebra next year, you need to be really comfortable with all of this. It's going to save you so much time and drama if you feel very comfortable moving things back and forth like this. So remember that these are your reference numbers. Memorize this set, and we always fill those into the top row before we start doing the problems so that we'll have a strong example to look at. Now, let me show you the way John sets up your homework for you. Here's your homework down here. It says complete the table, begin by inserting the reference numbers. Oh, the reference numbers, once again, are 51 over 100, 0.51, 51%. That's why he leaves that top row blank for you. So you can copy this whole thing into your homework just the way it is, and you'll be all set up. Once you get the reference numbers inserted, then you can look at the second row. Oh, 1 over 8. So you have to figure out, for problem A, you have to figure out the decimal. For B, figure out the percent that is represented by 1/8, and then go to the second row. Here we get 0.22 as the decimal. Okay, first do the fraction and then do the percent on that, right? That one's a little bit easier than the first one. So in the end, you will have all the boxes filled in, and I'm going to tell you, I think it's just for this lesson, but when we're doing these, no, it won't be. When we're doing the reference tables, I want you to do all the letters that show up in the reference table, okay? A, B, C, and D. So in the homework, I'm going to write this out. In the homework, always complete the reference table. Okay, do all the parts of it. Don't skip even and odd. I know we usually do that, but I'm going to ask you to tough it out in these tables and always fill in all the blanks of the reference table. Okay, that is lesson 55. I guarantee you I'll be asking a review problem about this because it's super, super, super duper important. Yay, that's the end of lesson 55. Students, I'm excited. That was a great lesson. I'll see you next time for 56.